Okay, and we are continuing on with the painting of the female drow. And the wash is complete, and it's all washed up here. So now the next step is to reestablish some of the base coat colors. And to be doing that, I'm going to start with the Arctic White again, or actually, sorry, the Dead White. And put a little more of that on the palette. After a good shake, these Vallejo Game Color paints really, they take a lot of shaking in order to get them to flow right and mix up all the medium together. So sometimes you really gotta spend a few minutes shaking them up before you put them out on your palette. Otherwise, you can really get some kind of halfway saturated paints there. A lot of medium and a little paint, a little pigment. Okay. I think I'm going to, I have this brush here. It's just one of my favorites. And rightfully so. It's the Raphael Kolensky, and it is an 8400, and it is a size 0. And this brush, for so many reasons, is just amazing. And I highly recommend, if you can spend a little extra money on a brush once or twice, this is the one that you want to spend a little extra on. So yeah, I kind of went a little crazy on buying it. I forget how much it was. I got it on Blick, and it was on sale at the time. They were doing a sale. So just gonna get a little water going here. And I'm just gonna reestablish some of the colors that were pre-highlight or pre-wash. So, and I apologize. I try my best to kind of keep the content going as I'm doing this, but sometimes you're just almost working between breaths when you're doing miniatures this small, and it's for me, it's like, I don't want to admit that I can't do two things at once, but sometimes it's a little difficult to keep talking while I'm doing this. But I do my best. You know, I'm trying to generate some interesting content here, so you bear with me. And yeah, so a little more. This is this drow that we meet. It's not actually. It's the party members are going to meet. It's not. I think I said before. It's not actually a drow. It's a doppelganger. So doppelgangers, as I'm sure you can tell by the name, they are originally a German apparition, and the legends behind the doppelganger are that if you see yourself as a ghost, sort of a ghostly apparition, it's a kind of an ill omen. It's a portent of your own demise that people sometimes would see, letting them know that if they saw themselves as a ghost, sort of a ghostly apparition, that they might not have long to live. And the doppelganger has made its way into mythology all over the world. So I think almost every culture now knows something of the doppelganger. And honestly, that's not really the way that they're represented in 5e. And in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the doppelganger is, like I mentioned before, a shapeshifter that can emulate other intelligent creatures. So they have a few attacks that they can make, and I'll go over those here in just a second for you. I'll talk a little bit about how they work, and essentially these doppelgangers are spies in this game. They are spies of the Black Spider, a nefarious drow mage who is kind of pulling the strings all the way through the Lost Mines of Phandelver. Just going to mark that as a spoiler. Maybe a little late. So, yeah, as his spies, they show up from time to time throughout the adventure, and there's two of them in Lost Mines, and they're both drow. There we go. Just trying to see if you can see that. And so they're both drow, and they just sort of show up and give the party a hard time. Now, yeah, they're in all sorts of underhanded dealings that are going on. Next, I think I'm going to do the tights. So I've done Heavy Violet. Now I'm going to give it another base coat to kind of bring up those lights again. I'm going to use Royal Purple and get royally purple with this drow. So I'm going to squeeze just a tiny little drop out on the palette here. I'm going to move the palette up a little bit so whoops, you can see. Whoa, hey, what's going on? And I think unlike most model painters, I really, yeah, I don't have the best setup. I'm just going to admit, I don't have the fancy shelves with all of my paints behind me so that you can see how much money I've spent on all of them and how obsessive compulsive I've become during the course of my model painting. But all fairness, I'm relatively new at this. I haven't been painting models for very long, honestly, or painting miniatures. I say that, but truth be told, I actually enjoyed painting miniatures since the days of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. And it was funny when I got into Dungeons and Dragons, it was, it must have been 1990, and we would play on Saturdays with a group of my brother's friends, and they would come over to the house, and we would we get together and we would play, and we use miniatures, not for everything. We mainly just use miniatures for the members of the party, and we would just kind of use them to establish the marching order. Every now and again the dungeon master would call out, "Okay, party marching order," and we would just line up our miniatures how we thought they were marching, in what order they would march. And it just kind of give you an idea of where they were in proximity to certain things most of the time, I guess. So when I moved afterwards, I lost touch with that group. of players, and I missed playing Dungeons and Dragons on Saturdays. And you know, to be quite honest, there was the people I were playing with understood the rules of the game, and were very helpful about just explaining when certain rolls were needed and what numbers needed to be added or subtracted in order to calculate armor class 0, and finding out whether or not an attack would hit. And when I lost contact with that group, I still wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons, but despite having the player's guide and the dungeon master's guide, I just couldn't really make heads or tails of a lot of the rules involved with D&D Second Edition or AD&D Second Edition. So, I just kind of did my best. I knew that you awarded experience points for fighting animals, and it was tough for me to understand how to keep track of all that in my 10th grade year of high school. Okay, I'm going to switch over to a little bit of hexed lichen, and to just kind of highlight these purple pants. So yeah, it was fun, and I really appreciate Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition because it's so much easier for me to figure out and keep track of. But one thing that I really was, I would buy the books during the AD&D Second Edition days, and I would just look at the pictures, and I would just be awestruck at how amazing the artwork was, and I would create these campaigns that they, of course, I was never going to play them. It was just stories that I could use based on the pictures that I saw in the books. I was gonna create these adventures that I never got around to. But as I got more excited about it and spent more time looking at the books, I wanted to work on the miniatures. So I remember going to the hobby store. There was a hobby store where I lived in North Carolina in the Outer Banks, and it was I think it was like a train hobby store. And the interesting thing is that a lot of times, for some reason, Dungeons and Dragons and model trains kind of overlap a lot in the hobby established shops. I don't know why, but they do. So I think that this was like a train hobby shop, and it was I think it was called AJ's Hobbies or something to that extent. And I went in, and they had some miniatures. They had miniatures for train sets, and they had miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons, and they had little miniature trees and all these great things. So I picked up some miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons, and I got really excited about the idea of painting them. And I got some paints. I got some little testers paints, I think. And at one point, I think I was at the mall at a hobby shop, and I saw an airbrush, and I thought, I'm going to buy an airbrush and use that. But yeah, it wasn't a real airbrush. It was just sort of like a hobby airbrush that was run off of a can of compressed CO2. So there you go. Now I'm going to use I'm going to go back to the drow here. I'm going to go back to this kind of skirted area underneath, and I'm going to use some warlord purple and start off with that and see how it goes here. And Warlord Purple is one of the hardest for me to find. It's just, I don't know why, but it disappears a lot. It's always missing. And so when I look for it, it's never to be found. Yeah, so I'm looking here at my paints that I have all put aside, and here it is. Sorry. Okay. So here we are with Warlord Purple, and I'm just going to put a tiny little bit out on the wet palette. And it's funny, I'm putting all of this down, and I'm only using I think I'm putting down the tiniest amount of paint, and yeah, I barely use any of it. So I guess I feel like you can never put down too small of an amount of paint, and this is really okay. So, and maybe I can use just a little bit of this. Maybe, I put down these other purples, and I think that I can honestly, before I put down the Warlord Purple, I think I can go back and maybe use some of this to really reestablish some of the colors here, because even though I put down that wash, I think I can still kind of see through the base coat in a few places, and so it needs to be touched up. So I am gonna touch it up just a little bit before moving forward, and I'm going to, I can see places where the red from the cape has managed to kind of come in there and kind of get all over the place. Big surprise. Yeah, the wash should really establish some contrast, but you really afterwards have to go back in and kind of work over the areas just a little bit that got hit pretty hard by that wash, because they just turn so dark sometimes you can't even make out the colors that they're supposed to be. One thing I did that when I started painting miniatures for AD&D 2nd edition was I bought some pewter miniatures, and that was really what all the miniatures were at the time. They were all made from pewter, and they were really small. The details were very great on them. They just sort of, I guess that's a knight, right? He's got a sword in their hand. It could be a man, it could be a woman. You just don't know. It's just kind of like, easier to use the they and the them pronouns with the miniatures from AD&D 2nd edition, because he just didn't know. He just really, not trying to be too, politically incorrect here, but yeah, it was just difficult, more so to tell, because the level of detail just wasn't there. So you just, when you were painting them, you could establish those a little easier when you were doing the paint job on them, and but they were really difficult to paint for me. and I enjoyed it, but at the same time, I knew that it was something that I would need to spend some money on in order to really progress in the hobby. But just having a couple miniatures wasn't bad. It was kind of cool to just have a couple small miniatures that represented a few different classes, and you could get by with it. Throw down a couple testers paints. I didn't need an airbrush. You might be asking, well, what about now? Do you have an airbrush now? Yes, I do have an airbrush now. And it was something that I went out and purchased because I found it, I think on Craigslist. Yeah, I went on Craigslist and I got an airbrush from someone who lived a few miles away. Actually lived about 60 miles away in a place called Sebastopol. And I didn't want to drive all the way to Sebastopol, so I contacted this person and I said, hey, is there any chance I could PayPal you and you could mail me this? And they said, oh, I guess if you trust me, I could. And I said, oh, I trust you. And I PayPal'd them the money. And then, of course, I freaked out for several days afterwards, thinking, oh my gosh, they're never going to send this to me. But then a box showed up in the mail, and sure enough, inside was an Iwata airbrush. And it was $100 for the airbrush. And they sent some really cool, I was really happy that they included this in the purchase. They sent some just fantastic translucent acrylic paints that they had that I guess they decided they were never going to use. And on a lot of these models from WizKids, a lot of these D&D miniatures have translucent spell effects on them. And they were great for these translucent spell effects, these transparent paints that they had sent. And so I was really happy that I bought this Iwata. And Iwata is just a well-known brand of airbrush, and they're quality airbrushes, I feel like. So I was pleased with my purchase. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to continue shaking this Warlord purple up a little bit. And I'm probably not going to use too much of it, but I do kind of want to come back in here one last time and hit the front of this skirt with a little of the hexed lichen. Okay. Now, this is a bit more of a bright purple, and I'm just going to use a tiny bit. Don't even know if you can see that. Yeah, I guess you can. So, yeah, I'm just going to put a little bit of this on the tip of my brush, maybe thin it out with this little bubble of water right here. So I have this little bubble of water here that I'm just kind of working into the paint to thin it out. And I'm going to go in with this and see about bringing up some of these details, some of these highlights. Let's see how this works here. It's like the way I feel about it is, if it's horrible, I just won't do it again. But if it works, then great. So I thinned this paint down quite a bit so that I could really see the layer underneath. And I didn't thin it down that much, I guess, but that was the idea behind thinning it down, was that I wanted to be able to keep that color that I had used for the base coat. I hear the crows outside this morning. Yeah. So I'm just kind of trying to use this on the most raised areas here to give them a little highlight and separate them ever so slightly from the leggings. Okay. Now, I would like to go and reestablish the skin color a little bit. So I'm going to use some of the, again, the same color that I used the first time, which is Underdark Gray. And I think I still have a little bit of it out on the palette, but yeah, this is from the Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments. And I think I still have a little here, but yeah, I'm just going to make sure that's the... What I did there is I just put it next to the color that I already had, just to make sure that they were the same. And I'll try to get a little water here to just make sure that they're... And then I'll kind of blot the water off my brush so that I don't have a giant drippy mess when I go in with it. Okay. Okay, so yeah, it got darkened up quite a bit when I put the shadow wash on, and now I'm just gonna go back and retouch some of these areas just a little bit with the original color. And the shadows will still stay down in the cracks and crevices, but it will unmuddy some of the colors and the places where I got a little overzealous with the gunmetal. I don't know if you saw that, but it did happen. Yeah, so working on faces is one of those times where it's just like you almost work between your breaths. And so, yeah, I apologize for not saying much. I'm just trying to control what I'm doing here as much as I can. And it is a little difficult for me to do two things at once sometimes. So, yeah, there we go. Okay. Wow. I'm going to do a dry brush on the crossbow. I'm going to hit it with a little parasite brown. And then just to kind of bring out some of those corners. Oh gosh, it's let's see here. Where's my that I showed you that dry brush that I like, the little small one here. It's number 2. I'm just gonna, yeah, I barely got any paint on it at all. It's all medium, all liquid medium. I'm gonna shake it up again, and I'm using for this, I tend not to put them on the wet palette. I tend to use this little palette here. And I'll just put a drop down, and I'll put my paper towel here so that maybe you can just kind of see. I don't know if I can get it on the camera or not, but yeah, so I'll just dab a little of this in here, load up the brush, and then wipe it all off. Yeah, dry brushing, oh gosh, it's just, it's such a great technique, but you gotta, it works so great most of the time, but you really, you just got to accept this is what I tell myself. I'm not really wiping away the paint. I am just leaving the pigment on the brush and wiping out some of the water so that I have straight pigment on the brush. And then I feel a little better about wiping it down, but Oh, I apologize. And yeah. So that just kind of creates the illusion that it's wood. Hopefully. Okay. So now a quick touch up with. I think that's as far as I'm going to go with the. Normally I might do just a little bit more, and use just another color to dry brush on there. But I think I'm going to stop there. As far as the wood, I will. I will need to put some details on again with some silver. And I'm not gonna. I think I'm not gonna dry brush the silver. I'm going to just kind of put it on very gently on the places where I put gunmetal already. You can kind of see it enough, but maybe just a quick touch with the silver to really. So yeah, this is Game Color Silver, and I'm going to use that nice Zero Kolinsky brush to just re-bring out some of these areas that took a little bit of a hit with the wash and the dry brush there. Why might do this one. All right. Yeah. Silver is definitely much brighter than the gunmetal. really kind of tends to make things stand out even more, even though that gunmetal alone was, enough to really see those metallic edges. The silver really just really defines and takes it to the next level of brightness. Yeah, so, again with the painting off camera. Okay, I promise I'm going to get better about this. I think maybe that's just the range that my eyes focus the best at, so that's kind of continuously where I go to. And you would say, well, why don't you move the camera? And that's a fair question. And maybe I will. But I kind of like the position that it's in here sometimes when it comes to having it over the palette, so that, and the palette is kind of where I need it to be. All right. One of the things that I want to do while I have this brush out is to put the whites of her eyes into place. And so I'm just really going to try to get a little bit of a tip on the brush here. Best as I can. Kind of get it into shape. Dip it into my white color. And I'm just going to go hard. I'm just going to go for it here and see if I can get it right on top of those darker areas that I put down earlier. Oh, gosh. Okay, now what I will need to do is add a touch of red on top. So I'll wait for that to dry. And then yeah, I might, let's wait if I want to touch it again. So yeah, I will wait for that to dry, and then I think I'll use this contrast paint again. In just a moment. I do kind of want to get just a little bit more of so I'm going to look for a mid-range between a little more skin color, a little highlight on the skin there. So I'm just going to try to look for maybe a little bit of a mid-range between between the grays. And I think I'm going to use cold gray, which should be a little lighter than the underdark gray, but not so bright that it's just going to throw everything out of proportion. So yeah, looking at it here, it's It's like just a shade, just a touch lighter, to do just a few of the highlights for the skin tones. Yeah, that's way too much. Just that little tiny drop. Using it for days. And so, yeah, I got a little water on the brush tip, and I'm going to water it down just a bit, spread it out, and then blot it off of my brush onto the paper towel. And then I'm going to go back in here and see what I can do. First, I'm going to start right. Oh, gosh, that's so much. It's barely any, but it seems like it's so much on the tip of the brush. I'm just going to see if I can kind of pick out some of these highlights. The paint just dries so quickly when you're using just a little bit on the tip of the brush. It just, almost the second you put it on there, it's dry. But yeah, when I first put it down, it looked a little gaudy, but now that it's drying, it's starting to become a little more transparent. And I think I'm ready to put the eyes, the pupils, the red pupils in. And I do have just a tiny little dot of that contrast red. Okay. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, one of the things I learned, I feel like, in ceramics was that anytime you're doing something that's just really small detail work, or you're doing something very delicate, you kind of like work between the breaths and steady yourself a little bit by touching two hands to each other so that you have a little extra stability. Normally I would go in and I would do a little black dot for the pupils, but I think at this point it's going to leave well enough alone. So, yeah. Well, I might, I might come back and do the base on this because I can't just leave it like that. But I'm probably not going to do it right now because we are getting ready to play in just a couple of hours here, and I feel like maybe I need to spend my time doing a little preparation work before we play, and just cleaning up the house a little bit so that when everybody comes over it's not such a mess. I'm a bachelor, so I live by myself, and I do get to make quite a few messes, and don't have the luxury of somebody telling me when to clean them up all the time. So I have to figure it out myself, and it's usually at the very last minute before I have guests come over is when I decide to do that. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave this as is for right now because I do need to get it out on the table, and it would be nice to put a little more work into it at the moment, but I don't have that much time. The one thing I might be able to do real quick is just kind of put a little accentuation on this diadem up here. And what I could do is, just kind of pick that area, and then The color I want is squid pink, and to just kind of do a little highlight with. So give me 2 seconds while I grab that squid pink. It should be over here. Again, it's one of those colors that is easy for me to lose. Yeah, here it is. It's just great. It's just that chewing gum pink color. And I had a little on my palette earlier. And it's just as dry as the day is long. Okay. All right, so yeah, I'm just going to call this table ready, and thank you for watching. I really appreciate you tuning in, and yeah, maybe I'll post a picture later on of what it, when I finish the base a little bit. But yeah, thanks again, and get out there and paint some miniatures and play some D&D. Thanks. Bye.